I'm pleased to call to order today's hearing of the African Affairs Subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I'm honored to once again serve with my friend and colleague, Senator Isakson. I'd like to welcome the other members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee who will be joining us later, and thank our distinguished witnesses. On the first panel, Ambassador Johnny Carson, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, and on the second panel, Mark Schneider, Senior Vice President of the International Crisis Group, Mvemba Dizalele, Fellow at the Hoover Institution, and Anthony Gambino, a Fellow at the Eastern Congo Initiative. Today's hearing on the elections and governance in the Democratic Republic of Congo is both timely and important. Last month's elections have been marred by reports of widespread irregularities that are symptomatic of greater challenges of governance. Today we will consider steps that can and should be taken to improve governance in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We will look at U.S. policy towards this country that has been tragically plagued by decades of conflict, poverty, and insecurity. The recent presidential and legislative elections in the Congo have become the subject of intense international scrutiny. Election observers from the European Union and the Carter Center have both recently concluded that the results are lacking credibility. Reports have detailed mismanagement of the tabulation process, restricted access for international observers, missing ballots, and voter turnout in some districts allegedly greater than 100%. This was clearly not a well-run election. And I insist that Congolese authorities must now engage in a thorough and transparent review of the results to address important unanswered questions. Now that the Congolese Independent National Election Commission, known as CENI, has released data from all polling stations, there should be a thorough review of the results, taking into account reports of irregularities from the many observer missions. As the U.S. State Department said last night, the United States stands ready to provide technical assistance for such a review that will shed light on whether these irregularities were caused by a lack of organization or by outright fraud. New questions surrounding the election are emerging each day this week, and I have received a steady flow of both information and phone calls from concerned Congolese Americans reporting fraud and concerns about post-election violence. Today, I call on both President Kabila and Mr. Tshisekedi to urge their supporters to resolve their disagreements peacefully and avoid an escalation of violence. The unresolved issues surrounding this election cannot be answered through violence in the streets. Instead, all sides should engage in dialogue about the best next steps and consider establishing a formal mediation process with the active support of the United States and the international community. It has been the hope of many in the DRC and around the world that these elections would help move the Congo further towards peace and stability after a terrible civil war that left, by some estimates, 5 million people dead between 1998 and 2003. The U.S. and many in the international community have invested significant resources and diplomatic capital into improving governance and human rights in the DRC, including more than $13 million to support free and fair elections in this election cycle alone. A stable and democratic Congo is in America's interest because of its critical role in the region, its large population, its vast natural resources, but also because it's in our interest to promote fundamental values: human rights, transparency, freedom of expression, rule of law. These values we hold dear have been sadly routinely trampled on in the DRC, where in some instances gender violence and rape has been used as a weapon of war to punish and silence civilians, especially women and children. As I've said earlier, the problems with this election are indicative of far greater problems facing the DRC, rooted in a lack of strong, democratic, and transparent governance, which we hope in partnership to move the Congo towards over time. Without government control over its territory and security forces, armed soldiers and militia members will continue to prey on Congolese civilians. Weak institutions prevent the DRC from upholding human rights and the rule of law and successfully addressing complex issues surrounding conflict minerals and sexual violence. The recent elections presented a great opportunity to further strengthen the foundation of a more effective and credible government, and I am concerned that this goal has not been achieved. I look forward to hearing from our experienced and talented witnesses about what concrete actions the United States can and should take to help resolve the pressing and difficult questions, both about the conduct of the recent elections in order to improve governance, but also how best to mitigate post-election violence and strengthen the rule of law and human rights in the Congo. We stand with the Congolese people in their attempt to advance democracy and hope it can be achieved peacefully. I'd now like to turn to Senator Isakson for his opening statement. Senator?
Well, thank you, Chairman Coons. And first of all, I want to recognize my friend Johnny Carson, the Undersecretary of State, He and I are the only two guys over 50 named Johnny in Washington, D.C., and I'm proud to be one of the two. I also want to thank Chairman Coons for calling this hearing. I was thinking as I heard his opening statement, he and I traveled to Nigeria earlier this year where they had just completed their first really successful Democratic election with the election of Goodluck Jonathan, and we later went to Ghana where President Mills has a great country, a great free, open, transparent democracy, and the benefits that are coming to them. So we think this is a particularly important time to focus on the elections in the DRC, some of the alleged difficulties with those elections, and hopefully find ways we can lead the DRC to have more transparent, secure elections in the future and be a role model democracy in that part of Africa. As Chairman Coons has said, it is a critical country and a critical continent to the United States of America, and we appreciate our relationship and friendship with the DRC, and we understand the problems with the Lord's Resistance Army, with lots of other things, but we also know there's a long way we can go in terms of democracy, ending gender-based violence, and having a more civil society. So I commend you today on calling this hearing. I look forward to hearing from my buddy Johnny Carson and our other witnesses who are here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I